The Academy had never seen a human before. To them, she looked fragile. Small frame, soft skin, no claws, no armor plates. They laughed when she struggled to lift the training gear. But then, she gripped the alloy frame with one hand, and the sound of bending metal silenced the entire room. The underestimated arrival. The transport shuttle descended through the violet atmosphere of Station Calyx, and Maya Chen pressed her face against the viewport, watching the massive structure grow larger with each passing second. The Galactic Defense Institute sprawled across the artificial moon like a metallic city, its training facilities visible even from orbit. Somewhere down there, she would prove that humans belonged among the stars, not just as scientists or diplomats, but as warriors. The docking procedures took 40 minutes, during which Maya reviewed her acceptance letter for the 100th time. She had applied on impulse after reading about the Institute's reputation for training the galaxy's finest soldiers. Earth's military had laughed at her application, calling it ambitious to the point of delusion. Her commanding officer had actually said the words, "You'll be crushed on day one." She intended to prove them all wrong. The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Maya stepped into the reception hall. She immediately understood why everyone had been so concerned. The other recruits towered over her like living monuments to evolution's creativity. The nearest one stood at least 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished obsidian. Another resembled a massive insect, its chitinous armor gleaming under the station's lights. A third seemed to be made of living crystal, refracting light in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Maya was 1.6 meters tall and weighed 60 kilograms. By Earth standards, she was average. Here, she looked like someone's lost child. A floating sphere approached her, its surface covered in blinking lights that she assumed represented some form of communication. After a moment, her translation implant kicked in, converting the light patterns into comprehensible speech. "Designation and species for processing," the sphere said, its tone neutral and bureaucratic. "Maya Chen, human, Earth," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the stares she was receiving from every direction. "Human?" The sphere's lights flickered in what might have been confusion. "Checking records. Yes, application approved under technical specialist classification. You should report to the engineering wing." "I applied for combat training," Maya said firmly. "Error in file. Humans lack the physical capacity for combat training at this institute. Your skeletal density is insufficient. Your muscle mass inadequate. Your cardiovascular system too limited for high-stress operations." Maya had heard variations of this speech from a dozen different sources over the past month. She pulled out her datapad and displayed her approval certification, complete with authorization codes that the sphere couldn't dispute. "My application was approved. If there's an error, it's in your system, not my qualifications." The sphere's lights pulsed rapidly, processing this information against protocols that apparently hadn't accounted for stubborn humans. Finally, it spoke again. "Approved applicants must be given opportunity to attempt qualification. Report to Orientation Hall 3. Physical assessments begin in 2 hours. Medical staff will be notified of your species' fragility." The sphere floated away before Maya could object to being called fragile. Around her, other recruits were whispering among themselves, and she didn't need a translation implant to understand the tone. Amusement mixed with disbelief. The universal sound of people watching someone walk confidently toward disaster. She made her way to Orientation Hall 3, following holographic signs that adjusted to her height after the first few minutes of struggling. The halls were designed for beings much larger than her, and she felt like she was walking through a giant's home. Everything was too big, too high, too far apart. Even the water fountains required her to jump slightly to reach the controls. The orientation hall contained approximately 50 recruits, none of whom were human. Maya took a seat in the back row, which turned out to be a mistake because the seats were sized for species averaging 2.5 meters tall. She ended up perched on the edge like a child at a grown-up table, feet dangling above the floor. The recruit in front of her turned around, revealing a face that looked like someone had carved features into granite, and then decided to add extra eyes for intimidation purposes. This was a Thaxian, if Maya remembered her xenobiology briefings correctly. A species known for their military prowess and their general disdain for anything they perceived as weak. "Is that an actual adult, or did someone bring their offspring?" The Thaxian rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. His companion, a serpentine creature with 6 arms and scales that shimmered between blue and green, laughed in a way that sounded like wind chimes falling downstairs. Must be an adult. Look at the bone structure. That's full development for their species. Ancestors preserve us. What is it doing here? This is a combat training facility, not a daycare center. Maya had learned long ago that the best response to mockery was silence. Let them underestimate her. It would make the rest easier. She pulled out her datapad and began reviewing the training schedule, ignoring the continued commentary about her size, her apparent fragility, and the betting pool that was apparently forming about how long she would last. A Vorlian drifted into the space beside her, its body composed of organized energy fields that resembled a humanoid shape, made of aurora lights. The Vorlian glowed a soft blue, which according to her briefing indicated polite curiosity. "You're the human everyone is discussing," the Vorlian said, its voice emanating from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "I have studied your species. Your problem-solving capabilities are remarkable. There are entire academic papers dedicated to human cognitive flexibility. There are also papers about our endurance capabilities." Maya replied quietly, "But nobody seems interested in those." "Endurance?" The Vorlian's glow shifted toward purple, indicating confusion. "Your cardiovascular system is optimized for moderate activity and low gravity. Extended exertion should be beyond your species' capacity." "Extended exertion is basically our defining characteristic," Maya said, "but I guess we'll see." Before the conversation could continue, the lights dimmed and a holographic projection materialized at the front of the hall. The figure that appeared was a Krentha, a species that looked like evolution had designed a predator and then given it military training. 4 arms, armor plating that seemed to grow naturally from the skin, and mandibles that could probably bite through steel. "I am Combat Instructor Jarek," the projection announced, its voice resonating through the hall with authority that made Maya's bones vibrate. "You are here because your governments believe you represent the finest warriors your species can produce. Over the next 12 cycles, I will determine if they were correct or merely optimistic." Jarek's image panned across the assembled recruits, and Maya felt the weight of that gaze even through the hologram. She sat up straighter, refusing to be intimidated by size or reputation. Station gravity is maintained at 2.4 standard, which represents the average comfortable environment for 70% of known species. Atmospheric composition is oxygen-nitrogen at 1.2 pressure. If your physiology cannot adapt, you will be transferred to alternative programs. If your courage fails, you will be dismissed. If you die during training, your government will receive a formal apology. The Thaxian in front of Maya leaned toward his serpentine companion and spoke in a voice that carried farther than he probably intended. 20 credit says the human doesn't survive the first physical assessment. 30 says she requests transfer before we even reach the training floor, the serpentine replied. Maya didn't respond, didn't react, didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing she had heard. Instead, she made a mental note of their names from the roster displayed on her datapad. Kravik and Seseth. She would remember them when evaluation results were posted. The orientation continued with standard information about facility layout, emergency procedures, and behavioral expectations. Maya absorbed it all while simultaneously calculating how her body would respond to 2.4 standard gravity. That was roughly 2.3 times Earth's gravity, which meant every movement would require more than twice the normal effort. Her muscles would fatigue faster, her cardiovascular system would be stressed, and her skeleton would be supporting more than twice her normal weight. It would be difficult. It would be exhausting. It would be exactly what she had trained for. When the orientation ended and recruits began filing out toward their assigned quarters, the Vorlian drifted beside Maya again. "The gravity will be challenging for you," it said, concern evident in the orange tinge now coloring its energy field. "Your species evolved in much lighter conditions. The physical stress could be dangerous." Maya shouldered her pack, which felt heavier than it had on the shuttle, and smiled. "Challenging is good. Challenging means I'm learning something new." She walked toward her quarters, each step slightly heavier than she was used to, her body already beginning to adapt to the increased weight. Around her, other recruits moved with varying degrees of comfort, their bodies naturally suited to this environment. Maya wasn't naturally suited to any of this, but humans had stopped caring about what was natural a long time ago. They had decided that limitations were just starting points, and they had built their entire civilization around the concept of exceeding expectations through sheer stubborn effort. Tomorrow, the physical assessments would begin. Tomorrow, everyone would see what humans were actually capable of. Tonight, Maya did what humans had always done when facing impossible odds. She prepared to prove everyone wrong. Breaking expectations, the training floor looked like someone had designed a nightmare, and then installed excellent lighting so everyone could see their suffering clearly. Maya stood at the edge of the massive facility, watching other recruits move through their preliminary exercises with varying degrees of effort. Kravik the Thaxian lifted weights that probably massed more than a small vehicle. Sesith, the serpentine creature, navigated an obstacle course with six-armed grace that made the whole thing look choreographed. Even the Vorlian she had spoken with yesterday was performing admirably, its energy field condensing and expanding to meet each challenge. Maya felt the gravity like a constant weight pressing down on every part of her body. Her shoulders ached, her legs felt like they were moving through thick liquid, and her cardiovascular system was working overtime just to keep her upright. This was going to be brutal. Instructor Jarak stood at the center of the floor, all forearms crossed in a configuration that suggested deep skepticism about the universe's recent decisions. Strength assessment is mandatory. Your species may define adequate differently, but this institute has one standard. Can you carry your equipment, traverse hostile terrain, and engage enemies when technology fails? That is what we will determine today. The recruits had changed into training gear, which meant Maya was now standing among beings who looked like they had been specifically engineered to make humans feel inadequate. Kravik's musculature suggested his skeleton was more of a loose guideline than actual structural necessity. Sesith moved with mechanical precision, her six arms working in perfect coordination. Even the smaller recruits looked like they could snap Maya in half without significant effort. The first assessment involved moving through a series of gravity-modulated platforms while carrying weighted packs. Maya watched Kravik complete his run in just under 3 minutes, his massive legs driving him forward despite the increased gravitational stress. Sesith finished in 2 minutes 40 seconds. Her lower body undulating across the platforms with reptilian efficiency. Then it was Maya's turn. She stepped onto the first platform and immediately felt the gravity increase to 3 times Earth standard. The weighted pack on her back, which had felt manageable in the staging area, now felt like someone had filled it with compressed star matter. Her knees didn't buckle, but they definitely had strong opinions about the current situation. Maya moved forward anyway. Her pace was slow, each step calculated and deliberate. Her brain kept trying to apply Earth-normal physics to her movements, and her body kept reminding her that those rules no longer applied. She looked clumsy, inefficient, like someone learning to walk for the first time while everyone else was running marathons. But she completed the course. 5 minutes and 40 seconds dead last among all recruits, but she completed it. Jarek approached her with a datapad in 2 hands while his other 2 arms remained clasped behind his back. Your movement pattern is extremely inefficient. Your musculature is clearly struggling to adapt. My musculature is adapted for 1 gravity, Maya replied, breathing harder than she wanted to admit. Give me a few days. You believe you'll adapt to nearly triple your homeworld's gravity in days? I've trained in worse. That got Jarek's attention in a way that simple defiance hadn't. Explain what you mean by worse. Maya straightened, ignoring the protest from every muscle group in her body. Weighted vests that add 50% of body weight. Resistance bands that make every movement harder. Training in compromised positions specifically designed to reduce mechanical advantage. We don't train in optimal conditions. We train in conditions we expect to fail in, and then we make those conditions worse. That is irrational. That's preparation. If you only train in perfect conditions, you only perform in perfect conditions. Combat isn't perfect. Before Jarek could respond, an alarm sounded across the training floor. The equipment handling drill was beginning, which meant recruits would now demonstrate their ability to move heavy gear without mechanical assistance. This simulated field conditions when anti-gravity systems failed or power was unavailable. Maya's team consisted of herself, Kravik, Sesith, and a hexapedal creature named Thorzan, whose species specialized in stable load-bearing. Their assignment was to move a training pod from its storage position to the testing alcove across the facility. The pod massed approximately 2 tons and came equipped with 2 anti-gravity assist units to make the task manageable. Human takes rear position, Kravik announced without consulting anyone. Minimum strength at minimum mechanical advantage. Basic physics. Maya bit back several responses and moved to the rear position. Pick your battles, her Earth instructor had always said. Save your energy for fights that matter. They activated the anti-gravity units and lifted together. The pod rose smoothly, hovering at waist height for the taller recruits and chest height for Maya. They began the slow procession across the training floor, moving in synchronized steps that would have looked professional if anyone had been watching, instead of focusing on their own assignments. Halfway across the floor, Maya's anti-gravity unit made a sound that no functional equipment should ever produce, a grinding whine that spoke of failing components and imminent disaster. "We have a problem," she said. The unit died before anyone could respond. 2 tons of mass suddenly obeyed physics in the least convenient way possible. The rear of the pod dropped, and suddenly everyone was fighting to control a rotation that would end with expensive equipment destroyed and possibly several recruits injured. Kravik roared something in his native language that definitely qualified as profanity. Across multiple species, he twisted, getting his shoulder under the pod's midsection, but his angle was wrong. All strength, no leverage. Seseth's 6 arms strained against the pod's frame, trying to arrest the rotation, but she was positioned for stability, not dynamic load management. Thorzan braced with 4 of his 6 legs, wedging himself between the pod and the floor. But his species was built for static loads, not rapid response to shifting weight. The pod continued falling, rotating slowly toward the maintenance pit that dropped 3 meters down into a tangle of power conduits and coolant lines. If it fell into that pit, the damage would be catastrophic. Maya moved without thinking, operating on instinct and training that had prepared her for exactly this kind of disaster. She got both hands under the rear edge where the anti-gravity unit had failed, found the balance point, and lifted. The pod stopped falling, her shoulders articulated in ways that probably violated several safety regulations. Her back engaged with enough force that she could feel individual vertebrae expressing their discontent. Her legs, which had already endured hours of training in gravity that wanted her dead, decided this was their moment to stage a formal complaint. She lifted anyway. The pod rose. Not quickly, not smoothly, but it rose. The rotation arrested. The weight stabilized. Kravik adjusted his position, getting proper leverage now that the load distribution had changed. Seseth's 6 arms found their rhythm. Thorzan's legs locked into stable configuration, but Maya kept lifting. She shifted her grip, transitioning from 2 hands to 1 hand while her other hand reached out to wave Seseth toward the support clamps mounted on the nearby wall. She was holding 2 tons with 1 hand, in 2.4 times Earth gravity, which meant the effective weight was closer to 4.8 tons by her homeworld's standards. The training floor went silent with the kind of quiet that precedes either violence or revelation. Instructor Jarek crossed the distance in 4 strides. All 4 of his arms extended in a gesture that might have been shock or defensive positioning. "What augmentation are you using? Cybernetic enhancement? Genetic modification? This violates natural capability parameters." "No augmentation," Maya said, her voice strained but steady. "Can someone get those clamps? My arm has opinions about how long I can maintain this position." Seseth moved, her 6 arms grabbing the support clamps and positioning them under the pod. Maya lowered the weight onto the support, stepped back, and tried very hard not to let anyone see how badly her hands were shaking. Kravik was staring at her like she had just casually violated several fundamental laws of physics and possibly a few moral ones. "That's impossible. The leverage alone. Your muscle density can't generate that much force. Your skeletal structure should have collapsed under that load." "Apparently it didn't," Maya said, flexing her fingers and checking for damage. Everything hurt, but everything still worked, which was good enough by human standards. Seseth's scales rippled through several colors that Maya's translation implant suggested indicated confusion, mixed with respect. "Your homeworld gravity, you said it was 1 standard. And you mentioned training in worse conditions. Explain exactly what you meant." Maya did the math in her head, converting Earth measurements to galactic standards. "We train with additional weight added to our bodies. 50 to 80% additional mass is standard for strength conditioning. Some protocols go higher for specific adaptations. Thorzen's translator took a moment to process this information, and when it finally spoke, its voice carried the tone of someone who had just discovered an uncomfortable truth about reality. You're saying you train in your lighter gravity, while artificially adding weight that would simulate heavier conditions? Yes. How heavy? Depends on the training goal. For general strength, we typically train with loads that simulate twice our body weight in our home gravity. For specialized conditioning, sometimes higher. The silence that followed this explanation was profound. Jarek's mandibles clicked repeatedly, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. Your effective training environment, he said slowly, when you add weighted resistance to one standard gravity, you're conditioning yourself in approximately 1.8 to 2.0 standard gravity, sometimes more. That's roughly accurate, yes. Kravik made a sound that was probably his species' equivalent of a strangled laugh. You're telling me that what you do casually back home, your normal training routine, is comparable to what we're experiencing here? I wouldn't say casually. Training is work. It's supposed to be work. Maya looked at the pod, still resting on its support clamps, and felt the adrenaline beginning to fade from her system. But yes, if I went home right now and walked into a standard gym, the equipment would feel lighter because it's designed for one gravity and I've been conditioning myself for heavier loads. The Vorlian from yesterday materialized beside the group, its energy field pulsing with colors that suggested mental processing at maximum capacity. Your species trains by artificially creating hostile conditions, then adapting to those conditions, then creating worse conditions. That's the basic methodology, yes. That's not adaptation. That's recursive trauma converted into systematic improvement. That's fundamentally irrational. It's also extremely effective, Thorzen added, his 6 legs shifting in what might have been nervous respect. How strong are your actual warriors? Your elite soldiers? If you're just an average specimen, I'm not a warrior, Maya interrupted. I'm an engineer who maintains standard physical fitness. Our actual combat specialists train significantly harder than I do. The training floor had gone completely silent now. Every recruit, every instructor, every automated system seemed to have paused to process this revelation. Jarek was reviewing his data pad with the focus of someone who had just discovered a significant error in their fundamental understanding of reality. I need to see your medical scans, all of them, and I need documentation of Earth's standard military training protocols. Why? Because either you're an aberration, a statistical outlier that doesn't represent your species' baseline capabilities, or we've been fundamentally misunderstanding what humans are capable of achieving. Jarek looked up from his datapad, and his expression conveyed something between respect and concern. And if it's the latter, then we need to completely recalibrate our assessment of your people's potential. Maya smiled, but there was no humor in it. You should assume it's the latter. Because I'm not special, I'm just stubborn. And humans are really, really good at stubborn. She looked around at the other recruits, all of whom were watching her now with expressions that ranged from shock to respect to something that might have been fear. We spent millions of years as persistence hunters. We didn't outrun our prey. We didn't overpower them. We just followed them until they collapsed from exhaustion. That's in our bones, in our psychology, in every aspect of how we approach challenges. We don't stop. We don't quit. We just keep pushing until either we succeed or physics itself gives up and lets us win. Maya picked up her equipment pack, settling it onto her shoulders despite the protest from muscles that had already exceeded their reasonable limits for the day. So yes, I'll adapt to your gravity. I'll meet your standards. Not because I'm exceptional, but because refusing to adapt isn't something humans know how to do. She walked toward the recovery area, each step deliberate and measured, leaving behind a training floor full of beings who were all simultaneously recalculating everything they thought they knew about the small, fragile species from Earth. Behind her, she heard Kravik speaking to Sesseth in a voice that carried across the sudden quiet. I think we might have severely miscalculated what humans are. Maya smiled to herself and kept walking. They had no idea, but they were learning. And that was exactly what she had come here to teach them.